Okay, so I guess we can start a little bit with a introduction. So hello everyone. So thank you for being here, and welcome to Fashion Revolution Week and the Fashion Animals event. So I'm Athena, and I volunteer with Fashion Revolution Scotland, and I'm also a huge animal rights and vegan lifestyle advocate, and also ethical fashion advocate as well. So the idea of this event was born when I read the book Fashion Animals by Joshua Katcher, which is I 100% recommend if you're interested in this topic, in the topic of animals that are used for fashion. Of course, my interest in animal rights is not new, okay, but to be entirely honest, it's the last three and a half years that I have become more considerate fashion consumer from various aspects. It was my involvement with Fashion Revolution Scotland and my love for vintage fashion as well. And I started investigating and exploring further, like different materials that can be used in fashion, and then also understand the conditions and the impact that fashion industry has on the world. So billions of animals suffer and die for clothing and accessories every year, like small furry animals that are caged and killed for their fur. Skin is torn from animals to make leather. Feathers ripped from birds. I don't want to go further, but you obviously, if you are interested in this topic, you have seen probably graphic online material. So it's horrific farming conditions, exploitation, suffering, and all this for fashion. So the questions I want to ask today to the experts of our panel is like if, and also the audience as well, their thoughts and opinion matters. So does it worth it, and is it okay to exploit and kill animals for fashion, and is it necessary above all? So for me personally, the answer is no, um, because apart from my love for the animals, I also have found out through my research that there are other implications. So the production of animal-derived materials also contributes to climate change, land devastation, pollution, water contamination, and so on. So I'm just wondering if people that love and care for animals, if they understand this situation, and because I feel that even people that are vegan, in a way that they eat vegan food, they don't understand also the other aspects of veganism and how to create a cruelty free world. And fashion, I think, is probably one of the list of the areas that were least investigated in that aspect regarding animals. Even though this is not new, so if you read the book, which I highly recommend, if you read the book, you will find out that the discussions for alternatives to leather, wool, and feathers, and so on, is something that was documented from the Victorian era. So people were actively looking to find solutions to stop using animals. However, we're still here, and this still happens, and it's something that I personally don't understand. And especially now that there are so many materials that are quite popular, that are alternatives, and of course I would like to hear from the experts on that, but I do know some of them, like hemp and apple pills, which I find very interesting, and also the recycling of materials that already exist. So why is still an issue, and why people still exploit and abuse animals for fashion. So this is the main question of today's event. So we'll hear from the expert of the panel, and hopefully they will give us some answers on all these questions. So I'm just going to introduce now very briefly the members of the panel. So we have Libby Anderson, who is an animal welfare policy advisor. So Libby has worked as the policy advisor and policy director for One Kind, for Scottish SPCA, as a consultant for animal protection groups and Scottish local authorities. She has been involved in animal welfare legislation and in founding the cross-party group on animal welfare in the Scots Parliament. And currently she is the secretary of the Wild Animal Welfare Committee and a member of the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission and the Scottish Steering Group of the UK Centre of the Animal Law. I'm sorry, I have to read all this. It's a lot of information. So that's Libby. Thank you, Libby. Connor Jackson. He's the CEO and co-founder of animal protection organization Open Cages. He's an award-winning filmmaker and a grad reviewer for the Pollination Project. His experience in animal advocacy covers areas such as undercover investigations, media campaigns, and lobbying. Hello, Connor. Thank you for joining us. Nikki Taylor. Nikki has worked as a fashion and shoe designer for UK high street and within the luxury sector. However, disturbed by the far-reaching effects of the fashion industry on people and the planet, her work now explores the complexities of fast fashion, consumerism, and waste. She's the country coordinator for Fashion Revolution Scotland, and she teaches youth workshops on sustainability, zero waste, and circularity, and also she's a lecturer in textiles at the Edinburgh College of Art. Hello, Nikki. And Millie Scott. So Millie is an independent designer maker on a mission to turn waste and surplus material into beautifully made practical pieces. She has a degree in fashion design from Heriot-Watt School of Textiles. She specializes in working with pre-loved fur, but she also works with recycled and off-cut leather and surplus heavy-duty interior industry fabric. She's an ethical and sustainable fashion advocate and also a volunteer with Fashion Revolution Scotland. Thank you, Millie, for joining us. And Kat Anderson, she founded Treen, a vegan fashion retailer bringing positive impact brands to the consumer shopper in 2018 after changing to a vegan lifestyle and struggling to upgrade her wardrobe to match her values. I have the same struggles. Kat has 10 years experience in fashion retail and saw an opportunity to create a vegan fashion community based on providing an amazing fashion experience that celebrates sustainability and social good. Thank you, Kat, for joining us. So I said enough. So the first topic that I would like to discuss is probably the most obvious of the materials that when we see it, we immediately think of animals, which is fur. So fur is, I would say that it's only natural when it's on the animal. So because people keep saying that, oh, I wear natural fur or I wear like fake fur or faux fur or whatever other ways or they call it. What other reasons, apart from the fact that it comes from the animal, so if you don't want the animal to be tortured and so on, what other reasons we need to avoid fur for? And what are the policies and the laws around fur farming in the UK and specifically in Scotland? So this is, I think, a question for Connor, who I think has the most experience on that topic. So Connor.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me here, and I'm really glad to be here with so many cool people. Yeah, so I think the most important main thing to mention about fur is that there are basically two main ways of producing it on an industrial scale. One of them is what we typically think of, which is trapping. So this is coyote-like animals who are caught in cruel traps that hurt their limbs, and then they are shot or killed. But most fur actually comes from fur farms, and this is something that most people, I think, don't realize. There's over 100 million animals reared for fur every year, and the three biggest fur farming countries, so we have China, Denmark, and Poland. I've actually had the misfortune of being going into many fur farms, especially in Poland, because I produced a documentary about how fur farming is making this insidious comeback in Europe. And even though I was a animal rights activist and for a long time and an animal advocate, I didn't even really have any idea of how large scale the fur farming industry was until I started looking into it for this documentary. And I certainly didn't have any idea of just the extent of suffering that the animals go through, because they are wild animals kept in barren cages their entire lives. And they basically develop types of madness because it's just so unsuitable. And the fact that most of it comes from farming, in terms of other than the incredible amount of suffering that the animals go through, one of the myths that the fur industry tries to push a lot is that it's real fur is more environmentally friendly than faux fur. But there was actually some research that showed that mink fur was significantly worse for the environment than faux fur. And this is because real fur needs to be treated with tons of chemicals, otherwise it would just rot. So not only is fur farming horrific for the animals, it's actually damaging to the environment. And my organization, who is also present in Poland, and we've done a lot of work with local communities, because the people who live near these farms, they hate living near these farms. In the summer, their windows are just covered in flies. They complain about the horrific stench. I've also been to places in Poland where you can actually see the skinned bodies coming off of a conveyor belt, and people actually live near these places. So it's not only terrible for climate change, but it's also just horrific to live near these places. So for the local environment as well. And something I guess we're all very familiar with is the fact that now we're finding out that mink can actually have mutated versions of COVID-19. And so it's just this perfect storm of misery, of animal welfare problems, damaging the environment. And it turns out that we're actually in danger with this industry being kept around. In terms of policy and what we can do about it, so the UK actually banned fur farming 2 decades ago. And this is one of the reasons that people aren't so aware that it's actually still a thing, because we think about it as this archaic thing that's in the past. But we're actually importing and selling hundreds of millions of pounds worth of fur every year. And this makes absolutely no sense, because the reason we banned fur farming was because we deemed it too cruel. So if it's too cruel for us to farm, then it's too cruel for us to sell here. And just something I can say is just very good news is that literally the other day we actually handed in as a coalition, Fur Free Britain coalition, handed 1 million petition signatures to Boris Johnson calling for a ban on the sale of fur. And we think this is the most powerful way that we can actually make a huge dent in this industry as British people, particularly, is to lobby the government to finally introduce a ban on the sale of this. Not only would it make a huge dent in the numbers of animals who are being produced for fur, because the market will be smaller, but also I think it will send a very strong message to the fur industry that their days are numbered when we ban the sale of fur.
That's very, very interesting, Connor, and also very good news for the petition. Sorry, Libby, you would like to add something? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I hardly need to add anything. I think that was absolutely comprehensive, but I always have something to say. So on the two questions that you posed there, Athena, I mean, the first one was about why would people avoid fur if not for the animals? And I gave that some thought because you'd mentioned it before. And frankly, I think it's quite enough of a reason. I mean, it is the fundamental problem with fur farming and with trapping of wild animals. It is absolutely fundamentally an animal welfare problem. I was going to ask Connor about some of the things he's already mentioned, the environmental impact of fur farms. I mean, intensive farming brings huge problems of waste disposal for one, and problems in the community. So you've already mentioned that, and the use of chemicals. But I think the primary reason is purely and simply and legitimately animal welfare. So that was one of the things I just wanted to chip in. But The odd thing about the legislation that we have in the UK, so 2000 in England and England and Wales, and 2002 in Scotland, is that it was not brought in on grounds of animal welfare and the cruelty, which you rightly referred to there, Connor. Everybody knew what it was about, but legislation has to be evidence-based. And in those days, 20-something years ago, the elected representatives and the government said, well, we haven't got the scientific evidence of the suffering. I mean, it's bizarre to think of nowadays. But I worked in those days for the Scottish SPCA, and when we made submissions to the Scottish Parliament about that, we made the point that even if you had the best, in quotes, husbandry in these units, they would still be fundamentally welfare unfriendly and cause suffering, because these animals are wild animals and they're not suited to those environments. You know, foxes and mink both roam over significant territories. Mink are solitary animals crammed into cages right up next to all the other ones. They're unable to practice their natural behavior of swimming. They're semi-aquatic animals. They're deprived of all that. Now, nowadays, with more knowledge and acceptance of animal sentience, and people would question that outright. But 20 years ago, this was an ethical ban. But it did pave the way for other ethical legislation, like the ban on wild animals in circuses. So it was a good thing. But it was a very interesting, sort of convoluted process to make that argument. I don't know, there are many other bans in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe. I don't know if they're on an ethical or welfare basis, but I'm pretty sure it'll be on welfare. But in weighing up the ethics of something, and we think of the sentience and the behavioral needs of these animals, and then we compare that with the purpose for which the item is being produced. So where people have different views, but you might accept certain things to produce food because everyone has to eat and we make our choices, but not everybody needs to make fur, to wear fur, and that's where the ethical issue comes in. So.
Thank you, Libby. That's really, really interesting addition to what Connor said. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything regarding those two questions. I think that was very good information we received from Connor and Libby. Okay, so my next question now relevant to that is like, okay, so we ban farming, hopefully we don't produce fur anymore, but what happens with the fur that already exists? So what can we do with it? Okay, so I'm a big vintage buyer, consumer, but I always think of, regarding leather and fur, I always think if that's okay, if it's okay to wear it, because it's still derived from an animal. So what is what are your thoughts there? So I know that Millie uses vintage fur and leather. So maybe if you want to start, Millie, by sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really nice to be here. I'm so nervous, by the way, because I've not done a Zoom panel before, so I'm really sorry if I'm like totally shaky in my voice. Please excuse me. It's great to hear from Connor and Libby there. Yeah, so I obviously have got two sort of aspects to my business. I use vintage fur and leather offcuts to create products alongside a lot of other recycled materials. And I also have a service, a custom service, where people can come and bring their vintage fur. My voice is so shaky. Bring their vintage fur and I can remodel it into things. So that can be anything from making a jacket into a gilet, or making a throw, or making cushions. So I think there's a lot of options. You know, you might not feel comfortable wearing fur, which is also fine. You know, like, it's not for everyone. I totally don't agree with new fur or caging an animal. But there is so much, that's already been produced, and you just look at landfill sites all over the world. There was a recent post that I saw on Instagram the other day of a landfill site, and it's like 60 feet long, and there's so many problems we've got with too much waste. And fur is a really, the vintage fur, it's a really durable, high quality, high performing material. So I think it's a disservice to not use it. Like, these animals have already died, and what a shame to just chuck it. There's also, actually, I found a company that is in America, and they actually go around collecting vintage fur jackets, and they give them to like zoos and things, which is another option if if you're like, oh, I don't want to have fur like in my home or wear it. There's basically a use for every material, I think.
That's very interesting, and thank you. Yeah, so my other question would be like, how else we can use. So if we decide not to wear it, how else we can use it? And you already said that idea about zoos. So yes, Kat, you want to add something?
Also really happy to be here. Thank you. Yeah, just to follow on from what you said there, Millie, a couple of other places if the fur or leather already exists. I know you'd mentioned zoos. I was going to say a similar thing of any form of animal sanctuary or dog or cat shelter or anything like that. It can be used, particularly in colder climates, it can be used to keep the animals warm. It's more, if they're alone or separated for some reason, or they're coming into care, it can be really, really helpful to look after them and make them better again or keep them well. So I do think that's a good second wave of how it can help. Another area that we've researched, and we've shared this with a couple of our clients who have asked as well, there's a lot of charities out there, and I'd be happy to share any of them afterwards, that maybe for very underprivileged areas or very remote underprivileged and areas that people live in where they have little to no access to clothing in itself, let alone things that can keep them warm. That is a way that we could, like you were saying, Millie, maybe it could be turned into a blanket, or it could just be something that they wear when they're at work, or when they're, look, really, these people are working in probably very unethical places that do not really have a care for their warmth or welfare as much, unfortunately. So if we can help out in that way, that is another place that it could possibly go.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Kat. And yeah, if you would like to share the charities or places that that people can give or donate fur, that would be great in the chat room. Also, I wanted to ask Connor if you would like to share your the link, if we can watch your documentary somewhere, and you would like to share that would be great.
No problem.
Well. Thank you. So that's really interesting about fur. So similar to fur, I feel that it is the leather, okay, which is another material, again, quite obviously coming from an animal, again, similarly to fur, genuine leather, as people tend to call it, as it's labeled, it is considered like a luxurious garment. Like, okay, if you wear real leather or genuine leather, or if you wear fur, it's luxury, you're glamorous, and everything else that is alternative to, especially to leather, at least that's my experience, it's fake, and it's cheap, and is not as good as leather. I still hear that even from my mom sometimes. So I wonder again if the fashion world still supports this mentality, if people in fashion industry still have this idea that genuine leather is better than alternatives, and if there is a better way of marketing the not genuine leather, in order to make people understand that is equally or actually better than something that comes from an animal. And also, what are these alternatives? So I wonder if Nikki, I guess Kat also would probably help us with this questions.
Hello. Yes. I think, I was working in as a shoe designer to quite recently, and I was working on sustainable and vegan ranges, and yeah, I think it's kind of mixed. I actually feel like it's a little bit generational. I feel like older generations really value leather, and yeah, they kind of see that it's high quality and it wears well. You know, that's the thing with leather, isn't it? That it can, you know, as it gets older, it can actually sometimes look even nicer, you know. So people see it as being something that lasts a long time, as higher quality. But in particular, I was working with a sort of younger market, like 18 to 30-year-old kind of target customer. And to be honest, I don't think, like, I think the way that fast fashion has evolved, it just as we don't maybe question where our clothes are made, what's in them, where they come from, you know, that has devalued product can all over, you know, clothing and accessories, footwear. So I think the younger consumer who has been brought up in fast fashion environment don't question what it's made of. They just go, oh, that's affordable, and I like the look of it, and they buy it. So we've definitely seen that customers in a store that had leather product and a wide range of materials basically on footwear. It was more about a look, and it was more about what was in fashion, what was on trend that week or that month, is what the customer would buy into, rather than, and actually a lot of the time the cheaper products were going quicker than the others, more expensive. Not always, you know, there's companies like UGG who obviously have sheepskin, who, you know, it is like, you know, £200 product, and they're very popular, you know, they sell a lot. Yeah, and I worked for a lot of my career in Spain in sort of like really nice factories. So I was always like really proud that I wasn't kind of working in bad factories, which there's a lot in fashion. Yeah, there was a lot of talk, you know, particularly these were in Spain. So I think that's the thing as well. The UK, I think, seemed to be a bit more aware of like animal skins, and you know, there is a lot of people that are not so interested in wearing animal skin. But as in when I was working in Italy and Spain, you know, I definitely in Europe, I think there's a bigger appetite for animal skins. But yeah, I feel like it's gone. But one of the problems I encountered, I think, in the last year was when people were, I mean, in the last few years, there was such a rise in demand for vegan footwear, which is brilliant, you know. And I was really fortunate to be able to try and create more product that was vegan. But what I did see was like a lot of buyers buying into basically cheaper product that was plastic. And so for my point of view, like sustainability wise, it wasn't the best option, you know. It was quite, just to replace the leather with plastic, both very chemical heavy, is not kind of best for the environment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And also I can confirm that I am originally from Greece. So yeah, I can also confirm that people there are really into leather and anything else is just cheap and terrible. But yes, I would absolutely also agree on like, okay, we want to have an alternative to leather, but we need to find the best alternative that is also sustainable and environmentally friendly. And so maybe Kat, yes, would like to give us some more information on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your first point, I think we're also attracted to it. It's the magazine we see. It's the bag we see in the magazines. It's the bag we see in the adverts. You know, they are like maybe a Louis Vuitton, like even a bags you aspire to, and you might get a cheaper alternative, but it still is like that tote bag look or that slash bag look, or shoes or whatever the accessory is. I can see if you have no kind of idea about the leather industry and the impact it has on the people who work for it, obviously, the animals, and the people who live nearby in the environment. If you don't really have your head around that yet, because it's a lot to get your head around, you are just attracted to the product, of course. There is so much happening. Obviously, there are, you know, cheaper alternatives which are bad to the environment, as you were saying, Nikki, and it's best obviously that we avoid them. But it's great to hear places like Hermes and Stella McCartney are working with mushroom leathers. So there really is, I mean, you mentioned apple before, Athena, and there's orange like peel that's being made into a leather. It's incredible. And there's a vegan cashmere that we're chatting to, and some people chat. So there's literally just, it makes me light up because it's so interesting that it's unfortunate that we've had this time, and this will continue for a while, that there's been this time with kind of cheap, quick fix plastic alternatives. Oh, hashtag vegan. We can just put that label on it. Sell, sell, sell. More relying on the trend rather than on the longevity, and kind of ignoring it. Sort of fits in the sustainability bracket, but it doesn't actually count. So yeah, my point was just there is so much that already exists that is up and coming. So to invest in these brands when these bags come out is going to be fantastic. The more we invest, the more they can become mainstream. The more they become mainstream, the better minimums they can order from factories, so the better price point we can get as the customers. And then to your leather point, we've spoken with loads of our customers about this, so you're sort of asking questions. Well, what do you think? I think I'm okay with wearing leather, but I don't know if I'm okay with buying it new. And I think that's a really interesting place to go with that question of, I have helped customers if they know a bag that they want. And I mean, one win, if we're passing by the topic of this call, is it will probably be better in price as well. If you're looking for a second-hand alternative or something that you could maybe have repaired, we are a vegan fashion retailer. That's our part of our ethos. But yes, if something, more to your point, Millie, if something exists, if it can continue its life for some of its time, and that can help out the customer and it not go to landfill, there is definitely a point to be made there. Hope that helps.
Yeah, so absolutely, that's great, and it's great to hear the consumer aspect on that, because this is like really where we really need to focus maybe on how to market this and how to get people interested in where the clothes come from. So we have something in the chat room. Yes, that's very good. Does the panel think that fur and leather are okay to use if it's sustainably and ethically sourced and produced? So that's a question I have later, kind of like at the summing up regarding on if actually there are humane, in quotation mark, or ethical ways of actually using animals in fashion. So because Caitlin asked, for example, she says, I own fur bought from communities that have a subsistence living lifestyle culture, surviving off the land and utilizing all parts of any animal that is killed for the community and processing the fur naturally. Okay. Any thoughts on that? So is there can a fur be produced and sourced ethically? Yeah, okay. Who wants to go first?
I have some,
yes,
some thoughts. I think, it's interesting. It really depends on who, firstly, is the person we're talking about, because one of the fundamental points is it necessary? So for the kind of communities that you're describing, Caitlin, I think their needs and what's necessary for them might be very different to someone like on this panel who's living in a place where we don't need animal fur to be warm. So I think in terms of like morals, the moral side of things, that's very complicated, and I think it depends. I think from an animal rights point of view, there is animals shouldn't have to suffer for us if they don't need to, but it gets complicated when you talk about communities like that. But from an animal welfare point of view, I think really depends as well on how things are done, because I mean, you are taking the life of an animal and you're taking their fur, and you know, I can't imagine that they cuddle them to sleep. The thing.
Oops, wait, I think we lost Connor there. Hopefully he comes back.
Hello.
Hello, yes, we lost you there.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why.
That's all right. That's okay.
Yeah, I was just sum up my point is, I think so that there is a perspective of whether it's okay to take an animal's life for something like clothing, which depends a lot on the person we're talking about. I personally think that there is no need to do that, especially when there are alternatives. But there's also the actual issue of the welfare of the animals. So how is it actually done? And you know, it does involve taking an animal's life, and I can't imagine that you can do that in a way that is any way other than taking something that they don't want you to take. And on like the broader question, the thing about fur particularly is there is no, as was mentioned earlier by Libby, there is no way to produce fur industrially. And there's no way to produce fur on a fur farm, for example, without causing immense suffering, because there was actually some interesting legal changes where countries that introduced new regulations that meant that the animals had to have enough room actually stopped producing fur because it wasn't economically viable anymore.
That's thank you, Connor. Thank you for answering that. I think Libby also wanting to say something.
Yes, again, Connor's largely said what I was going to say, but I mean, ethics is a very personal thing, and you try to lay down sort of guidelines, and everyone will adapt them for their own views. Personally, I would see a huge difference between industrial scale fur farming entirely for the fashion industry, because the foxes and the mink don't get eaten, and the use of an animal, an indigenous animal, where people are living a lifestyle off the land, where they may have much less alternative towards the use of, regarding the use of animals. And in that context, as Caitlin has said, the animal's not only being killed for the purpose of fashion, but it's going to provide food, it might provide shelter. And regardless of what you think about killing an animal, and that is a whole other debate, but ethically, it seems to me those are two different ends of the spectrum. And if you're looking at things strictly in animal welfare terms, I mean, the animal welfare scientists would say death in itself is not a welfare issue. It is, of course, an ethical and a moral issue, but if it's humanely carried out, it's not technically regarded as a welfare issue. However, the way an animal's life has been lived is a huge welfare issue. And again, compare a confined, barren environment, mink or fox, with a free living wild animal that is perhaps shot, perhaps cleanly. I mean, I don't know exactly what context being described here, but that animal will not have had poor welfare inflicted on it by humans. You can't prevent poor welfare in nature, that's beyond us at the moment. But so our responsibilities to animals, are, if we're going to exploit them, is to treat them humanely. And yeah, I think the manner of the death is a really significant issue, but we don't know exactly what's being mentioned here. And even, you know, it can be very brutal, no doubt about it.
That's a difficult discussion, but it's important to have difficult discussions, I think, so we raise awareness and understand what's happening. And thank you, Libby, for adding to that. Anyone else who would like to add answering Caitlin's question? So because we have another question from the audience regarding vintage fur, and when does the fur becomes vintage, and if it's if we continue to buy vintage fur, does this mean that we kind of like promote wearing furs? This is a question I actually think myself. So how do you respond to that?
So I think I will step in here. So in terms of when does an item become vintage, I'm pretty sure it's 25 years. My mum and dad have got a vintage and antique shop, so I should really know that, but I'm sure it's 25 years. And yeah, I think that's a really great question. How does someone know? You know, and I think for me, as a business and personally, I'm always on my Instagram, I'm always, you know, very transparent about my practices. You know, I'm always like taking videos of what I'm working on, where the furs come from. I'll share stories, for example, if I'm working on a custom piece for someone and it's like, you know, someone's granny's, or if I'm wearing something like a vintage fur that I've remodeled myself and someone in the street will say, oh, I like that fur. I'll say, yeah, it's vintage. It's like the first thing that I'll say. You know, I won't be like, oh yeah, you know, I'm always talking about it. My friends are actually kind of like, can you just stop talking about secondhand things, please? Like, so yeah, and I think it's just about communicating that. But yeah, I think I'm just trying to read the other part of the question. Does this not just further and fund the fur industry and drive demand? If people continue to buy vintage fur, they are not just guaranteeing future custom for current fur farms. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I think yeah, I think it just depends on who you get it from. And I think if you know, if you're buying anything, you need to, if you're buying anything from any brand, it's about, you know, knowing who makes their things or where the material comes from. And I think you just need to be open about having these conversations. And, you know, as I say, it's something that I always talk about whenever people approach me about fur. You know, I hope that answers that. Okay.
Can I add one small point to this? Because I was actually going to mention something about this, that I think one of the problems with clothing and animals in this sense is that it's a kind of bad combination of mass production and an animal. It's just very slippery slope. I think that when there's financial demand for something, it's very easy for that to become like a larger scale, and for animals to be reduced to numbers and to pay the price. So like on one hand, you know, it doesn't make any sense to throw something away that already exists, but when there starts to be a kind of demand and supply, that does kind of sounds risky to me, that things could just become a business again, and animals will be, you know, again, they will be treated like they are on when it's new. So I think it's just a very it's very potentially problematic thing when you have animals plus mass production.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But yeah, I think it's quite a sensitive bit here with and that's why I wanted so much to discuss about fur, because it's such an obvious animal material, and obviously keep wearing it kind of like normalizes the idea that that it's fine to wear something that comes from an animal. So it's a little bit tricky this with the vintage fur. Anyone else who'd like to add on this? So I think mushroom leather is a hit in the chat room. Everyone's very interested in that. Do you have cut mushroom leather in your shop?
Not yet. It's something that we're researching for our own brand, which is very exciting. So I feel quite cool to be researching it at the same time as Hermes and Stella and other brands are saying that they're launching it. Adidas are going to be bringing it into collections in the coming seasons as well, which is very cool, along with the vegan cashmere as well. So we don't have any of that in just now. We do have, it depends on the time of year, so it's more of an autumn winter thing, but we have had which links it quite well into what we're talking about with the fur. We have fur alternatives that are made from recycled PET plastic bottles that are collected from ocean waste. They feel, look, and touch exactly like a genuine fur. They're some of the nicest I've ever seen. None of that kind of sticky, plasticky feeling. Very, very soft, very warm, and yeah, they're fantastic. And we have other puffa. It's not quite the same as fur, but obviously for down, which is, you know, another awful experience for these animals that are being kept to produce that for duvets or puffa jackets, also made from recycled plastic bottles spun into this kind of fluff, which is like a down, water resistant and very, very, very warm. So yeah, not the mushrooms yet, but TBC, I promise that will be around soon. And but yeah, lots of other alternatives in store. And just another point to add onto what Millie was saying before, I think if there is, I think, you know, go with your gut if you're the consumer looking at things, I think as small as possible, and just get your information. If you can't get 10 out of 10 questions answered with bonus point notes, for me, there's a problem. So maybe they're hiding something, or maybe there's information they don't want you to know, but you know, it's really, if you're going down a positive route, there's only good that can come from it. So it would be strange if any information was being withheld. I hope that helps.
That's great, Kat. Thank you. We're looking forward to the mushroom leather product. Excitement. And so there are some comments in the chat room, which is great. So Caitlin says, isn't that more about how we engage the public in awareness raising and changing culture more broadly about wearing new in general, as well as new fur or animal products? So we mentioned that a little bit about how we need to communicate this, and people have to start investigating more on where their clothes are coming, the materials that are used, and the conditions that they are produced. So there was another question earlier about if there are other invisible animal products in clothing and accessories, and if so, are there issues around those? That's a very good question, actually. Any thoughts on that? Yes, Nikki. You are muted.
Hello. In the footwear industry, there is a lot of the glues are also animal based. So, you know, with the fantastic thing is when, this is something that we quite often see in Fashion Revolution, is when you ask brands, you know, for more information, or when you so with the rise in people asking for vegan shoes, all of a sudden the companies need to have vegan shoes, you know, they don't want to lose any customers. And with the rise in customers asking for vegan shoes, that was a question that was asked a lot, was, you know, we had to, you can't sell something you can't say it's vegan without checking every part of that material. And obviously in footwear, for example, there are so many components, so you have to kind of go through every part of it. And one of the things that did come up quite a lot was the glues. But then what we found was, as soon as we spoke to suppliers about the glues used, there were alternatives there. And I was like, is it because the animal ones are more expensive? And they were like, sorry, less expensive, and that's why people use them? And they were like, no. And I was like, and the performance, is there any difference in that? No. So it's kind of like, why? Just because it's maybe been a historical thing that's been used, but it's just opening up these questions and dialogues, like kind of start to, you know, quite often people want, well, for the fashion, big companies, they want the cheapest option because their margins, they want to kind of, you know, so that's why they quite often steer away from the new developments and materials that are around. But so yeah, there are kind of hidden, but again, we have to, if you can ask a company that you're buying from, you know, it makes all the difference, because, you know, they start looking into their supply chain and start investigating. I do know that, you know, from working in the industry, that so many buyers and designers just don't question, just as a lot of people buying clothes that have animal products don't always think or understand where it's come from.
That's great, Nikki. Yeah, so indeed, I think asking this question, I think that's Fashion Revolution does a lot, is asking these questions and putting pressure on producers to give us answers. Any other thoughts on the invisible animal products in clothing? There are some other questions as well. Yes, Connor. Yeah.
Just a very quick and very something I think is really worth knowing about is that there is a loophole in the UK where you're actually allowed to farm rabbits, and because they're for their fur, because they're actually being farmed for their meat, you're allowed to sell their fur. And there's actually been some recent awareness about this because there have been some new rabbit farms rejected by local councils. So this is one of those things that I think many people don't actually realize, because we've actually banned fur farming, but there is this very strange loophole with rabbits, and it's on scale of tens of thousands of animals to one farm. So that might be something to look into more as well, that there is this UK market of fur from rabbits.
Well, that's really actually sad to hear. But yeah, that's so Libby wants to add something, I think.
It's because of the way the fur farming legislation is drafted, and what it prohibits is the farming of animals solely or primarily for their fur. And I mean, it seemed, I've just become aware of that too, Connor, and I think that would be something that could be revisited. But if it is said to be a byproduct of a meat production system, that would be very difficult. But that's why, I mean, legislation's fraught with difficulties. That's why it's usually better to try and find other ways to change people's behavior, I think.
Yeah, that's it kind of like makes it feel that it makes sense that if you use the animal for one product, you can then use it for something else, but it's still, is that okay? Yeah, well.
Yeah, and it's very, very intensive as well.
Yeah. And there's another comment from Kirsty. So reclaimed fur and demand would be Canada Goose. An example, they've stated that they will no longer use new fur as of 2022. Previously, they trapped coyotes for their fur. Does this make them ethical? Very, again, in the similar on what we discussed, like what can be considered ethical and humane. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything on that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of sort of a subjective question, because I think what one person deems as ethical, you know, if you don't want to wear fur, then you don't want to wear fur, and that's okay. But there is so much that's already there. I mean, we're living in a complete time of plenty. So, I mean, I'm not going to back Canada Goose, because I think it just gets a bit dodge when I just find it hard to trust, you know, really big companies. So I think it was Kat that had said, you know, companies that are maybe smaller scale and can be more transparent because they don't have complex systems that are in place where they can't keep track of everything. You know, I'm just me making and designing stuff, so I'm in complete control, and I know you can come into my workshop and you see my boxes of offcuts. There's fabric boxes everywhere in colors and types of materials. So yeah, I think that's kind of like a personal thing, rather than I don't think you could categorize that as what is ethical, if that makes sense.
Yes, Libby.
But I think it's the Canada Goose issue is a really good example of consumer power, because, well, not only the coyote trim on the outside, but also the use of down, goose down, which again, you know, serious questions about the production, whether it's taking, I mean, if it's live plucking in particular. So that, I mean, there were two fronts on which Canada Goose caused concern. And if I remember rightly, initially, the company said, well, okay, well, we'll have a welfare audit process and we'll go back to our suppliers and we won't allow this, this and that. And the big welfare NGOs looked at the standards and said, well, these are really not good enough. Meanwhile, competitors are developing better welfare standards, and clearly the way ahead is to use these amazing substitutes, alternatives that Kat's talking about, so that they become not the alternatives but the mainstream. But I was just said earlier, legislation is not always the way to go, and I think consumer power, the trend towards veganism, a vegan lifestyle, which includes not exploiting animals in fashion as well as in food, I think this is potentially a much more powerful and effective way to achieve what's wanted.
Yeah, that's great, Libby. Thank you very much for adding. It's a very difficult and I don't know. It's very difficult to answer these questions at least at the moment. But I think by asking questions, we might be able to get some answers. And as we said, the starting conversation and putting the pressure, it might be the best way of doing it. But to sum up, because it's already 8, of course, I think there is no other event, so we can keep going after us, because I think there's so much to talk. We didn't even touch wool, which was another topic that I wanted to discuss, but that's fine, because I think fur and leather are huge for this discussion. So to sum up, I just wanted to ask you what your best advice is to consumers regarding ethical fashion, and more specifically animals that are used in fashion. So what would you say to consumers? Maybe we'll start with Nikki.
Hi. So, I mean, maybe since it's Fashion Revolution Week, I would ask, what's in my clothes? Very simple question, but it's something, as a textile lecturer, I'm encouraging students to do all the time, because that just starts the investigation, to think about where something comes from, what's, again, it opens up a whole thought process. And I think that's the thing, we have to question everything. I think about every area of society right now, you have to question, and once we pause and think before we buy something, I think is really an important step.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Nikki. So as I see you on my screen, Millie is next.
Hey, so yeah, totally agree with obviously what Nikki's saying. I think as a consumer, a really great place to start would be to watch The True Cost, which is a documentary. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix. It's an amazing documentary which basically covers everything from like how a crop's grown to how it's made to who sells it. It's pretty full on, but it basically, after I did my degree in fashion, which there was no talk about sustainability. I mean, I only graduated like 6 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. The year after I graduated and I was setting up my business, I watched this documentary and I was just like mind blown and totally shattered, because I was like, oh my God, how am I going to go into this industry that's so exploitative and takes so much from the earth? So I think that's a really good place to start. And yeah, just like questioning things. Fashion Revolution is also an amazing resource. Fashion Revolution Scotland is obviously incredible. But the website Fashion Revolution, there's so many resources on that. Like if you're a business or if you're just a citizen, they've got things on like how you can mend your clothes, things that you can email your MP, or there's also a thing called the Fashion Transparency Index, where you can actually look up brands and they rank them for animal rights, labor rights, all these kind of things. So And just like asking, even if you see like an ethical brand, you could even ask them and be like, oh, I'm trying to shop more ethically, or, you know, just like ask if you're not sure. Because, you know, we don't know all the answers, and knowledge is power. So that's what I'd say.
Great, thank you so much, Millie, for that. Kat is the next one on my screen.
I would say totally along with you, Nikki, of the asking the two key questions: who made my clothes and what is in my clothes. Simple when you break it down, right? Definitely that. And I watched a really interesting panel similar to this with on BOF, Business of Fashion, with Stella McCartney recently, and I very much agreed with what she was saying of just having these uncomfortable conversations. The more we have them, the more they are going to be more comfortable, and the more we are going to get used to asking these questions about where product is made and who made clothes. And I mean, another point just to add, I'm kind of going over one point, but you know, vote with your money, like respect yourself, respect the people who did make the clothes and where the clothes have come from, respect the planet. But if you're looking at for number one, which is you, vote with your money, and it's the biggest way we can see change. It's really a kind of full circle act of respect for where it came from and yourself, and how you're going to continue to wear that garment and maybe pass it down or sell it on to someone else. That would be my advice.
That's a great advice. Absolutely agree. Thank you, Kat. Libby?
Well, I'll make 2 points, if I may. First of all, big shout out to you, Athena, because I've worked in animal welfare for a long, long time. And you very often feel you're highlighting the problems and suffering and the issues. And that's why people call us aunties. And tonight I've met Nikki and Kat and Millie and learned about this positive progress that's being made by people who are not necessarily part of our movement, but have got very similar motivations. So obviously moving forward with one voice and educating people on both sides of this movement is one thing. I think, you know, more of the same would be great. But also in terms of voting with money, as Kat's just said, absolutely, not only asking the questions for your own purchases, but ask the producers, ask the questions, write to the shops and say, why are you selling fur-lined gloves? And when they send you a bland answer, ask them again and again. And because that's just one person, but in a large movement, and in the big NGOs, and we see large companies changing their policies, particularly about fur, but not only about that. So I think it all starts with us.
That's fantastic, Libby. Thank you. And Connor?
Some very beautiful turn of phrase in those last questions. Knowledge is power, and I think that's been it's been quite covered about what you can kind of do as a consumer. So something a bit different I would just emphasize is that I think most people, when they think about this kind of thing, that's the main thing they think about, is the things that they eat and the things that they wear. So what you're consuming. But in terms of having the biggest impact that you possibly can, I would encourage you to think more about how you can use your power as a citizen. So, for example, spending an hour, I guess 5 minutes actually writing an email to your MP about how you want to see a ban on the sale of fur could actually influence your MP to support it, and could be the MP that actually gets the ban through. And also thinking from this wider perspective of the impact you can have, thinking about how you can use your career to address these problems. For example, we've talked a lot about alternatives and technology, and that's, if that's something that you think you could contribute to, studying something like this or pursuing something like that for your career, beyond just what you eat and what you wear, you could actually, make a very significant impact on these issues by getting involved and thinking about things like from that perspective. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say you could also volunteer with Open Cages, and we'll help you have a big impact for animals specifically.
That's fantastic, and that's a very good idea, Connor. Yes, I guess volunteering to with animal welfare organizations certainly can help open your eyes in such issues. So yeah, that's fantastic. I don't want to keep you longer, people. So I just want to thank the members of the panel very, very much for being here, for giving us all this amazing information and views and thoughts, and of course the audience. And there is another question in the chat, but unfortunately we don't have very much time. But it's a really important conversation, and I hope that we will be able to have another one and discuss even further these really, really important issues. So yeah, thank you very much, and you know, keep the good stuff up. Just ask questions, keep asking questions, okay? Thank you very much, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for organizing it, Tina.
No problem, thank you.
Thank you so much, Athena.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Athena.
Thank you.